Hey Neha, welcome to Network Capital. It's our pleasure to be hosting you today. As we get started, would love to hear from you. Who are you and what do you do today?
Hi, Varia. Thank you for having me. My name is Neha, and I am the trustee and founder director for an organization called SPRF, the Social Policy Research Foundation. We're based in Delhi. I've also been working on environmental sustainability for the better part of 16 years. So if there was a mainstay or a centerpiece in my professional journey, that would be it. I write because I enjoy writing. I drink a lot of tea. I travel a lot, and I love to have a chat. So I'm super happy that we're having one.
No, it's absolutely our pleasure to be hosting you here today. Let's start by talking about SPRF. Building a policy and research institution is a difficult task, and you've been at it for almost 5 years now. Um, and I think before that, I was going through your work and profile. You worked at a lot of interesting international institutions and organizations. So tell us about how you thought of SPRF in the first place, and how might have the places you worked at before inspired principles and just the design of SPRF.
That's a really long question. It's like one of those questions where I will go over my entire CV to actually come to bring it to a point of fruition and how SPRF came to be. But I think I would have to start with my first ever internship, which was at the Center for Policy Research. At that point in time, PRS used to be incubated at the Center for Policy Research in Delhi, and I think my sort of journey or foray into public policy starts around that time. That's when I realized that there is a space for bridging academic research and public policy, which is at the sort of core of what we now do at the Social Policy Research Foundation. So it took me almost 10, 11 years to bring it from an idea into a plan of action, into hiring a team, into getting a board in place. But over that period, over a period of a decade or so, between 2007 and 2017, is where I was doing a whole lot of other things, including my work on environmental sustainability with organizations like the Wildlife Conservation Society, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and others. I was in between countries, so I had just moved from Singapore to Bangladesh, and from Bangladesh back to India. And when I started speaking to the board of trustees here at SPRF, they seemed super keen on the idea itself, but also on looking to build work that would monitor and evaluate policy progress as well as pitfalls. So they wanted to basically look at youth in the ages of 18 to 35. If you take away caste and religion and region, that does sort of make the largest voting population in this country. And the board of trustees was extremely keen and also empowered me to build work that would engage and encourage people in that 18 to 35 age category to ask relevant questions, to have I mean, social media was beginning to take a large piece of our time in the everyday. So they wanted to make sure that whatever research we were doing was backed by fact, and it was not steered by opinion. And that's something that kind of resonated with the idea that I was hoping to deliver on whenever I sort of ventured back into public policy. So that's how SPRF came to be exactly 5 years ago. So we celebrated our fifth anniversary in April, which is last month. So yeah, so that's how old we are, and that's how we came to be.
No, congratulations on that. And I think it's interesting what you mentioned about, focusing on a specific youth demographic and trying to make sense of how they engage and think of policy issues. Um, With that, tell me a little bit about actually building the team at SPRF and inviting probably those diverse perspectives and within sort of the large youth demographic, looking at different representation coming into, and how do you sort of ensure that those aspects of inclusion and diversity that are important to you sort of translate into the practical operations of the institution?
I want to go at this question a little bit differently. So before I get into the team, I also want to cover how you build a board.
Yeah,
Uh,
actually, that'll be very interesting.
the board of trustees is fantastic. They are they are the sort of they're the sounding board that we have as the organization, and SPRF is one of the few organizations where the board and the team interacts on a quarterly basis. The board meets every quarter, and typically one of the younger team members will attend the board meeting. So there's diversity just in that. In terms of the age categories of people who are, we have three Padma Shris on our board, bringing a fantastic amount of very rich experience across diverse sectors. And then you have people who are on the team who are relatively young researchers in terms of the age and experience that they host. But it is that robust and comprehensive narrative that SPRF is has sort of always tried to make the most of. The board itself is pretty amazing. You have people from various walks of life. You have former bureaucrats. You have someone from the legal fraternity. Actually, more than not one, two people from the legal fraternity. You have entrepreneurs. You have seasoned journalists. You have people who are very, very close to current and former regimes, and you also have academia. And it's fantastic because just that flooding of perspectives makes for such a rich space and such an informed discussion that every time I go into a board meeting, I go in completely prepared with news, but also with my own views, and making sure that they're really backed by fact, which is SPRF's tagline. Subtle plug. But also just then, balancing that against the team. I think throughout I've tried to bring in diversity in terms of what the team has studied, where they come from, and who they truly are. So we don't I mean, we're one of the few teams where very early on we decided that we're not going to do a diversity and inclusion piece. We're just going to be it. We don't, it's not lip service, it's truly who we are. I think we come from very, very different backgrounds. And if you just scroll through the team page, you'll realize that it's quite remarkable and very rare, because in my experience, I found that it's very easy to get to a homophily, but it's very difficult to have the tenacity and the tangible sort of output of remaining diverse. So I'm trying to do that.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I found what you mentioned about the board very interesting, which sort of leads me to my next question. Um, Building an organization like SPRF, or I think broadly and generally navigating careers in at the intersection of policy, research, academia, they're tricky for multiple reasons, but one of the key reasons that at least I have observed is just navigating the network, knowing the right people, getting the right information. A lot, there is a fairly large information and opportunity mismatch. And while I know there are a lot of organizations like SPRF working to sort of alter that, if, through your professional journey and experience, what have things that have helped you do that? How do you ensure that you don't take your previous background or experience as something that either holds you back or makes you overconfident? Both cases.
I'm going to use that line, right? Personality reflects circumstance. And I feel that for me, at a very, very core level, I come from a family of professors. Both my parents are professors in Lucknow. And for me to build myself, who I am from scratch in Delhi, was a journey that required context, but also required action and very clear results. So for me, I think that's what I've grown up with in my professional journey. Um, I didn't have people who would open doors for me or, keep them open or keep conversations open. And I've grown to respect more and more the fact that all of this is a sum total of who you are also. And I wanted to build an organization and teams wherever I go, whether at SPRF or even for other organizations that I'm a part of, to build teams that reflect people who are entrepreneurial, who are ambitious with themselves, who are keen to do something more, who are keen to deliver, and who are not shifting the goalpost constantly. So for me, I think that that certainty in yourself comes from a certain assertion to yourself, and part of it is what I've tried to do with SPRF also. Throughout while I've been working, and now it's coming up to 2 decades. I was writing this recently for an introduction somewhere else, and I realized that I've been working for almost 20 years. Which is pretty cool, but it also, and you're right, because you're bound to be swayed by the experiences that you have professionally. And I'm really lucky, and I do have to say that I'm really lucky that I've had some of the best workplaces. I've had some of the best teams. I've had some of the most inspiring leaders. And I've had the opportunity. Why I say I'm lucky is because I've had the opportunity to observe them, but also to imbibe the best of them. So I hope I'm doing an adequate job of that while at SPRF. I do also want to um, try to empower people as much as I can, especially young women in public policy research, people from transgender communities, people who are queer, and we are trying to build that space more and more. It is difficult. Opportunities are different for different people, and there's a fine balance between when you want to put out the best, but you also want to make sure that you have the best team, and you also have the best team dynamic. So it gets complicated. Um, but just knowing that I'm trying my best every day and so is my team gives me a lot of confidence.
I think the fact that the space for policy, research, and writing is sort of getting enlarged and newer voices are coming and is in generally in this state of flux. I think that's most people more or less agree on this. um, that said, when you speak to young people just getting started, they're often very confused about where to begin, right? Like especially early career professionals, they know there are opportunities, but they often don't know where and how they should be looking at it. So I have a two-part question. The first part is help us understand this evolution, right? You mentioned it's been almost a 2 decade career now. What do you think is different in the space today versus when you started? And second, for someone starting now, how would you um, sort of recommend them to consider, finding the right opportunity for them?
Okay, that's so multiple issues that we might want to cover or
Yeah.
sift through in that response. But I think as as someone who's again who's observed the space grow, I think one of the first things that struck me, and when we started talking about SPRF, even with the board, one of the first things that they also came up with was the fact that public policy isn't for a select group of people who speak in a selected language, which is very complicated for everyone else to understand. It is really for everybody, and just because it is research, it should not necessarily be an exclusive club. So when we started SPRF, that was really at the core of one of our values, was to be inclusive in every way possible. um, which means that there is often, and you rightly sort of alluded to it in your question, that there's often confusion, especially with young researchers, because everyone wants to sound super smart and everyone wants to use super fancy words. And everyone is also thinking really fast. So everyone is thinking on their feet. But what we're looking for is a bit of gravitas, which is simple to understand, with every response, with every bit of research. And I think that is really the brief I try to give to my team when we're onboarding them, that the idea is not to to pursue research ad nauseum. The idea is not to talk in words that you can't explain to a grandparent or a niece or a nephew. The idea is to make public policy accessible. So if with that, we've been lucky to have, again, we've been lucky, and also we've been at it. I'm going to stop using the fact that we're lucky. We're beyond lucky, but we're also quite sure that the kind of people we hire are making that active choice to research well, but also to write and communicate well. I think one of the things that I've noticed, and this is sort of the second part of your question, when I started to where we're at now, I think as a young intern or a young researcher, I wouldn't ask so many questions about the research itself, questions about the process, questions about the ambition, questions about the outcome. And that led to a lot of uncertainty for all of us as a generation of researchers. It also stemmed from a fear of missing out on opportunities, of not having a job at the end of it, or not getting the right offer, not getting the right money. And I think that if there's one thing that I have a great amount of respect for this generation of researchers and young researchers, is that they're extremely brave. They're unafraid to ask questions. They're unafraid to seek answers. They're unafraid to write about those answers. As long as they're accountable to themselves, they're okay. And I appreciate that. I think we all run a little bit of a risk in getting too carried away with that, because if you're only accountable to yourself, then often you might be at loggerheads with the larger goals and ambitions of an organization. I've so far not had to deal with too much of that, but it is the idea of management, of boards, of trustees, and of more experienced people in the space to sort of rein that in, but also explain that well. And I think that's part of my job. So I'm hoping I'm doing an adequate job of that. But I see that we're building at SPRF, at least I can say that we're building a team that's talking smart, that's doing good work, that's proud of the work that they're doing, and that is unafraid. So for me, I think that's the big win in all of this.
I know you talked very briefly before on, mentoring and supporting, especially young female scholars sort of entering in this space. Uh, Talk to us about your experience with mentorship, because I think mentorship is one of the most confusing and ambiguous situation, because it's not like you can force a mentor to mentor you. You can't forced to be a mentee. It's a mutual sort of inexplicable relationship that builds and nurtures over time. So tell us about some of the interesting experiences you've had as either a mentor or a mentee, and if there were anything that you could extrapolate out of it for people to consider when they think about being a mentor or a mentee.
I think for me personally, and this isn't a generalization about mentors or mentorship or mentees. Um, I think just in terms of the work that I do, wherever I'm at, there is the completely, I mean, I'm honest with myself that I would like to create value. And that value has to make sense to me. So if I'm investing in people, that value of those people has to make sense to me. So I do and again, I leverage the fact that I come from professor lineage, right? So I'm used to teaching, and I'm used to, delivering a lecture for for whoever it may be of interest to. But I think from what I've seen is that in each team at different points in time, there is the need for very specific mentoring support. Sometimes it will be process mentoring. You will just need to build a process, deliver it, support it till it runs. Sometimes there is need for emotional support. And you have to make that distinction from time to time for yourself, because it's very easy to discuss feelings. It's very easy to talk about, how you're feeling about this work, or how are you feeling about an Excel sheet getting done, or where, are you feeling productive, etc. But you also have to be able to navigate that in a way where you are being kind to yourself, being kind to the people you're supporting, being kind also to the kind of leadership that you may have. I've been, again, in situations where the leaders have been absolutely inspiring. I work in environmental sustainability. I work on deforestation free supply chains. The work is so emotionally, it's constantly tugging at you. And you see these leaders who are fantastic women doing absolutely fantastic work, who may or may not be great mentors. And you might have great mentors who aren't great leaders. And those two are, sort of mutually exclusive, and you have to recognize that. For me at SPRF, I think one of the biggest wins that I can think of is the fact that we have a lot of people who join us who joined us as interns and have continued to become managers, or who've quit the organization and have come back to support the organization as consultants. I've also had people who started out as a research article, and have gone on to do a PhD in the same subject. So for me, in 5 years, to be able to have that kind of confidence and that kind of sort of response from the team has been extremely empowering as a leader. And I think that reciprocity is what perhaps enables me to be somewhat of a better mentor. And I'm saying this, that you get progressively better at it. You don't assign yourself mentor role from from the get-go, but you get progressively better at it. And I sincerely hope that I have. But you will have to talk to the team on that. This is just my version of it.
Yeah. Tell us actually about the research process in itself, right? I think mentioned before about how at SPRF a key focus is very fact and data based research and writing. That said, even uh, anyone writing obviously brings with them a certain background, a certain process of socialization, identity that informs the way they sort of look at a certain data set or a certain fact. So, in even in your own writing process, how do you sort of negotiate between the personal versus political versus sort of the objective data that you're working with? And I think just to sort of add to it, it would be interesting to see how you even train people in your team to address this, right? Because I think especially young researchers, when they start out, they often struggle with managing these things. I think over time you build a mechanism to not indulge in either of the three areas too much, and you find your own center. So especially as you're working with younger researchers, how do you sort of train them with this?
I think it starts right at the interview process itself, Varya, because when we're going through that first or second round of interview, I do make it quite clear that we have a very diverse board. We have a very inclusive team. And then when we say inclusive, it means that it does create a space for everyone's opinion to count. And if everyone's opinion counts, then then yours has to be as fact-based as the next person's. So part of it starts with that. Part of it also starts with understanding what the person's personal politics are. Um, and if this person is going to be able to navigate through that realm of personal politics into sort of evidence-based research. We've had people who are extremely vocal about their politics, who are part of the team, who do completely non-partisan research, and for me that is a win. Um, so I and I keep you I keep I think this is the second or the third response where I'm talking about this is my win. And I'm actually feeling like we're doing pretty well at SPRF, because if everything is amounting to a set of collective victory, then there's a sense of ownership for me, but there's also a sense of ownership that everyone in the team has. And I think that is also a part of it, because when the team feels like they are building towards this narrative of, agenda party neutral, agenda slash party neutral, or policy neutral work, I think they're quite agile. They're looking at the content and not the intent of it. And they're building fairly robust research. The process itself involves everyone in the team providing inputs for everybody else's research, which means that as a generalist, you might be taking on a particular theme, but you're also going to be, have a sort of a peer review, for lack of a better way of putting it, of people who are going to look at it and say, hey, this doesn't make sense to me, or why did you choose to ignore this other aspect of it, or why did you use this? So that helps. We also do a combination of primary and secondary research, and unlike a very long-winded sort of academic process, this is a quicker turnaround. I wouldn't say it's a quick turnaround, but it's a quicker turnaround. And there is always that anchor of evidence-based, that for us is quite critical in all the work that we do. Lastly, I also have a great team of research. Like, I have a great research lead as well as a great editorial team. So sometimes when personal bias might creep in, I do have an edit desk that sort of safeguards our interest as an organization and does a great job of it. So I mean, in terms of the process, I think each bit of research requires a different process navigation. But broadly speaking, I think it's not one person's decision. I'm not the final authority on it. That neither is the research lead nor is the editorial lead. I think everyone plays a part, and everyone is equally accountable for it, and that's what helps drive that sense of making sure that we're doing well.
Yeah, I mean, considering the amount of work SPRF is able to get done, it's really surprising that you actually don't work full time on SPRF. So how do you manage that? Like, how do you manage the work within SPRF? How do you manage your other professional commitments, and still remain sane through it?
Well, I don't remain sane through it. There will be enough and more people who will testify that she's not entirely sane. But jokes apart, I think I don't draw salary from SPRF, and I do have bills to pay. So my SPRF is my passion project. My work has always been environment, sustainability, and deforestation, pre-supply chains. So for me, that's what helps me anchor myself in my workday. The idea when I started SPRF was always to build something that would see itself through after a certain point in time. I do think that as a leader, and I want to well, allude to what Jacinda Ardern just said. You should know when to step away. As a woman, I'm acutely aware that I have limitations, and that I should be able to trust. So both things, for me, are quite important. I don't do a bulk of the research, but I have a very strong team that does that. The editorial team takes it forward, and then the comms and the design team puts it on social media. So setting that process has actually taken the bulk of my time, effort, and energies. But now that it is there, it really runs quite well. Of course, there are major and minor hiccups. My main job is to ensure that those hiccups are fewer and further from each other than we were at in during year one. But having said that, I think what we're building is, like, and I said this earlier as well, what we're building is creating value, and it's creating value for all of us on our own, in our own professional journeys, in our own research capacities, in the work that we do, in the work that we put out, in the brands that we will become, because each of us will become our own brands. And I think the team more and more relies on the fact that they have to be accountable for their own work, um, and they have to be accountable to themselves, which is what young researchers love. So yeah, so that helps. It I mean, for me also, and I think, post COVID, if there's one thing that we've all kind of realized, is that we're not doing 9 to 5 jobs anymore. We don't, you don't shut a desk, it's not a desktop. You don't, shut it down at 5 o'clock and then say, okay, abhi chai samosa ka time ho gaya. Like, you don't do that. You've moved on from there. And if you're personally invested in the work that you do, it's really not about the hours that you put in. Some days you put in 2 hours, some days you put in 12, and you make it work. So that's what I do.
Let's think a little bit like going forward. So far we've discussed the first 5 years of SPRF and what are things that have worked and how things have progressed. Where and how do you see things shaping up, say, over the next decade? And I know that's far away, and considering the last 5 years and how they've gone, there are so many unknowns that might dawn upon us in the next decade. But that said, knowing what you know today, where do you see SPRF heading towards 10 years from now?
Wow. When you started asking that question, and when I started saying 10 years in my head, it sounded like a lot. But then when I think back, and again, when we started this conversation, thinking about where I was when I was an intern, and it doesn't seem so far back in history. So 10 years feels like a blip, honestly. And I hope that in the next 10 years that SPRF is around, I hope we're able to do and produce quality work that actually helps in shaping public policy, that creates policy pathways that are feasible for departments that have use for it. I hope it helps people like you, younger people, navigate through very complex words and make sense of them. I hope it really bridges that gap between the academic silos that have existed for far too long in public policy, and actually make some sense and some headway in terms of making that accessible to people like you and me. So that's where I hope SPRF gets to. We've had a lot of support from the board in terms of themes that we should work on, in terms of fundraising that we should do. So I think that really helps. And I hope that we continue to engage at evidence-based research, but also at extreme as people. I think that human element in research is absolutely critical, and very often we miss it. But it's the people behind the research who make that research what it is. So for me, I hope we continue to be an organization that also does good work but has good people.
Yeah, absolutely. Any advice for young researchers listening into this masterclass, or people looking to apply to SPRF and to work with your team?
So for me, I think the most important bit is not the degrees you host. Yes, they're important, but it's also who you are as a person. And especially in the Delhi policy circle, everyone is like super smart and everyone has at least 3 or 4 degrees at the minimum. So it's not just the degrees that you have. I think it's the ambition and the drive that you bring, who you are as a person, and what you're truly passionate about. Because otherwise, it's an assignment and it's a task, and anyone can do a task, and the technical skills you get to over a period of time. It's the soft skills, it's the ability to read a room right, it's the ability to frame a sentence and have it really land. That makes you someone we want at SPRF. I'm happy to bring in a larger team eventually, and I hope that's part of your previous question. I hope the team grows as well. Um, but for someone who's looking to navigate a career in public policy, I think it's quite important that you know what you're getting into. You don't kind of keep meandering, because public policy is too huge a space. And that meandering comes very easy. But unfortunately, you have to know where you're getting to in order to be able to create a pathway for it. So in your personal and in your personal capacity as a researcher, I think I would encourage that. Find a goalpost and try and walk towards it. It need not be a sprint. It can be a marathon. It can be a slow moving process, but get to it. And you'll only get to it if you identify where you want to go. Yeah, I think those would be my sort of two key themes in new hires for SPRF. Just someone who's able to distinguish themselves quite easily, who's confident, and who knows where they're going. So yeah.
When you were talking about 10 years and you were talking about sort of actually using research to drive policy change, that's a slow process with multiple stakeholders, with back and forth and a lot of changes that come with it. Um how have you seen, like, previously, that cycle of idea and research translating into practical implementation? And maybe even some themes. What are some of the specific themes that SPRF has been focusing on in its first 5 years that you see making their way to policy implementation?
So I think as a core value, I think again reflecting on what the organization is currently and who we are. I think we're a patient organization. I think no policy change comes easy, and no policy change that is good or adequate is a quick turnaround. So one thing that I think everyone in the team also understands is that policy itself, or policy shaping, or policy narratives are quite complex and need to be studied from various perspectives. And then change can be tabled, and how that change gets executed is beyond the purview of a think tank. um, that said, I think part of the work that we have been building and that we're extremely proud of is not just thematic, it is at the intersection of themes. So for me personally, when I think of climate, I cannot not think of gender. And when I think of gender, I cannot not think of access. And when I think of access, I cannot not think of health. And when I think of health, I cannot not think of nutrition, and so on and so forth. So we live in very interconnected policy spaces, and it is at these intersections that SPRF continues to do and deliver its work. So for me, while we do have a lot of work that we've built on gender, on education, on the economy, it is really the intersections that we are most proud of. It is informing and creating work on those intersections that has also been most exciting for us, because very few people are doing it. There's so many experts in specific themes that people forget that there are intersections, and so that's the space that we're looking to occupy. So hopefully the next 10 years will be more of that.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to sort of revisit this conversation then and see how things have sort of transpired from now to then.
Absolutely, for you and for SPRF. So I'm also looking forward to see where network capital is 10 years from now, and where you are, Varya, 10 years from now, because this has been really interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Neha. It was lovely speaking to you.